The nouns in a REST-based system correspond to the resources that your system allows you to access and manipulate. As we mentioned before, we define these using URIs. So here's one of the nouns in our system, users, and this makes sense. It corresponds to all users. And then we have users/Alice, and this corresponds to a single user named Alice. The verbs in REST-based systems correspond to actions that we can perform on a resource. So if we were to say get users, that means we want to get a list of all of the users within a system. Alternatively, we could say delete users/Alice, and that means we want to delete the Alice user. Other actions include post for creating a new user, or put for updating an existing user. And these are the 4 actions that are most commonly used. Additional metadata can also be attached to the requests that are sent to the server using the request headers that go along with any network-based payload. So in the request headers, you can set extra metadata like specifying the type of the response format you want to get back, or specifying information about the user who's making the request, or some sort of authorization token. So there's this extra mechanism to add a little bit more detail to these REST requests when you make them. One other thing to keep in mind is that most REST requests should be idempotent. This means if you perform the same request multiple times, the same action should take place. The exception to this is post. But let's take a look at get and delete first. When you perform a GET request on GET users, if you do that request multiple times, it should result in the same action happening, and there should be no change on the server. At the same time, if you delete Alice multiple times, Alice should still be deleted on the server. The reason that post isn't idempotent is if you go and post a new user, say post a new Alice, it should create a new object on the server for Alice, but if you post again, it will create another new Alice. Right? Creates a new object each time. So that's the reason why post is the only non-idempotent action in most REST systems. When a response is returned from a REST service back to a client, it contains 2 main components, a header and a body. The header contains all kinds of different metadata, but one important piece is the status code. A standardized list of status codes are commonly used. For instance, 200 represents a successful request, where 404 represents requests for resources that could not be found. The response body can also be returned in many different formats. The most common formats are JSON, XML, and HTML. Each of these has its benefits and drawbacks. These 3 formats are used instead of plain text because plain text isn't self-descriptive and is harder to work with programmatically. HTML is commonly used in situations where you want the response to be displayed within a web browser visually. XML is an older interchange format which allows complex objects to be described in an extremely verbose fashion. Finally, JSON is used in cases where you want the response object to be parsed directly within a web browser or within Node, because every JSON object is also a JavaScript object.